Will Trump's tariffs increase prices for the average American? Will life be more or less affordable? How will Trump's tariffs affect American businesses? Let's go over all of that in today's video.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff, and it's my favorite word. It must be hard for you to, spend 25 years talking about tariffs as being negative and then have somebody explain to you that you're totally wrong.
I've seen a lot of people who are concerned that tariffs will increase their cost of living, so let's go over that today. Before I start, I just wanted to talk about the Democrat and Republican positioning on tariffs. The Democrats and Republicans don't agree on a lot of things, but you know what they do agree on? Tariffs. Trump implemented targeted tariffs on over $300 billion worth of goods in 2018. Then the Biden-Harris administration continued to implement those tariffs on those $300 billion worth of goods and even implemented their own set of tariffs, such as their tariff increase on over $18 billion of Chinese goods, including semiconductors and electric vehicles. I mean, check out this chart showing how much tariff revenue was collected under Trump versus Biden. Now let's start off with what exactly is Trump's tariff plan. Right now, as of the day that I'm filming this video, which is November 26th, Trump has currently stated that he wants a 10 to 25% tax on all foreign goods from various countries and a 60% tariff on goods specifically from China. This is even stronger language compared to when he first implemented his tariffs in 2018. So what exactly is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on goods imported from a foreign country. It is imposed with the intent to, number one, increase revenue to the US government, number two, restrict imported goods from foreign countries, and number three, protect domestic manufacturers from foreign competition. For example, let's say you have Nike, which we know manufactures its products in overseas Chinese factories. If it imports $50,000 worth of products to the United States and is subject to a 10% tariff, there is a $5,000 tax that has to be paid to the US government for importing the goods. So the question is, who is ultimately paying the burden of that $5,000 tax? The answer is, it varies. There are three choices for who could pay that tariff. Number one, you the consumer could pay that charge, aka you would be paying more for Nike products because Nike would choose to increase the prices of their products so that they can cover the tax. Number two, Nike could pay that charge to the US government and just reduce their profit margins. Or number three, the Chinese factory could pay that charge. Who pays for this tariff could be one, two, or all three of these. Most often, the consumer pays that charge. However, there are also some cases where the Chinese factory could pay that charge, but that only really applies when they're facing heavy competition from other suppliers. Now let's move on to economic impact. Are tariffs good or bad for the economy, wages, inflation, etc.? There are not many things in the world that are 100% good or 100% bad, and tariffs are no exception. They can be net positive or net negative depending on how they're implemented and under what circumstance. However, in economics, it is most commonly concluded that the negatives of tariffs outweigh the positives. Adam Smith, who is the father of modern economics and the writer of the seminal book The Wealth of Nations, states that generally we should promote free trade as the best way to allocate resources efficiently, and tariffs are obviously bad for engaging in free trade. However, Adam Smith also makes exceptions and states that tariffs may be justified when, number one, tariffs are imposed on industries which are essential to national defense, and number two, as retaliation against unfair trade practices. Aside from economists, manufacturing executives are currently split on whether tariffs are good or bad for the economy. Let's talk about when will the negatives of tariffs outweigh the positive, and then talk about when the positives of the tariffs might outweigh the negatives. When will these tariffs have negatives that outweigh the positives? Number one, if we have a blanket tariff that affects all goods with little to no exception. If we do have this universal tariff on all foreign imports, regardless of industry, this will severely cause inflation, probably cause retaliation, and probably lead to unemployment. All developed countries in the world do not impose a blanket tariff because it leads to global inefficiency and is highly problematic. In my opinion, and probably many others, this is not a good policy proposal. I think if Trump proposes to implement this in practice, there's going to be some pretty heavy pushback. Number two, the negatives of tariffs outweigh the positives when we have other countries that engage in economic retaliation. In the last Trump administration, China was really upset with the tariffs that the US imposed, so they responded by imposing their own tariffs on imports from the US, specifically on agricultural products like soybeans and corn.
Tough times getting tougher for rural America amid President Trump's trade issues with other countries. According to the Wall Street Journal this morning, farmers are filing for bankruptcy at the highest level in at least a decade. The Journal is also showing that farm debt is approaching record highs.
So then the US government had to provide $28 billion to the farmers between 2018 and 2019. They had to basically bail them out. This is obviously not great. Number 3, tariffs are not good when we put them on things that we struggle to manufacture, don't manufacture, or have no intention of manufacturing in the US in the future. Some manufacturing executives and economists believe the ship has completely sailed for some types of US manufacturing due to things like high wages, high labor costs, unions, lack of skilled labor, etc. For example, Black & Decker says they intend on heavily raising prices on their power tools if Trump imposes tariffs on these. However, the Black & Decker CEO also says that tariffs may be beneficial for industries that are under attack. It just really depends on what industry we're talking about. Check out this clip.
Is tariffs good for U.S. manufacturers, companies that make things like you guys do?
I actually think tariffs can be good for the right certain industries. And, certain industries are definitely under attack from Chinese competitors. And I think that's really what President Trump and his team is thinking through. They know the auto industry is under attack. They know semiconductors, the healthcare industry, certain other electronics industries where U.S. companies and U.S. manufacturers are definitely feeling the pressure of that. I'm not sure that necessarily applies in other industries. When I look at our industry, if I took our Chinese operation that we have today that makes power tools and brought it over in the U.S., the cost to make that product would be about 60 to 70% higher. So it's substantial.
Which the consumer is not going to pay for.
Which the consumer will not pay for. And so if we're going to reduce our China exposure, which we are, we'll be looking at other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, or maybe Mexico, where we certainly have a significant operation already.
Now let's move on and talk about when tariffs maybe will be justified. Number 1, when tariffs are used for dumping. For example, China produced more steel than it could consume domestically. Then they engaged in dumping by selling steel at prices below their production costs in the United States.
When it comes to the issue with the Chinese and the dumping of the steel, I mean, we've known for years that it's going on. They've been producing steel for domestic consumption for years, and it's because their domestic consumption was running at 12-15%. Well, when it slows to 7%, they find themselves with an unbelievable amount of steel that they can't do anything with, but don't dump it on U.S. shores. And it particularly doesn't help U.S. companies, and that's not a good thing. That's probably the worst facet of what we see in this international arena is the dumping of these products where U.S. companies are the ones that they're hit the hardest.
So as a result, the U.S. Department of Commerce imposed tariffs on Chinese steel imports in 2015 during the Obama administration and subsequent years to help U.S. steel producers recover market share. This helped U.S. producers recover market share, but obviously prices are not as cheap as they would have been had we just acquired the insanely cheap Chinese steel. Number 2, tariffs could be beneficial to stimulate certain industries that the U.S. needs a lot of help to be competitive in. For example, semiconductor chip production. Taiwan and South Korea are the current leaders in the semiconductor chip production, as over 90% of the world's advanced chips are manufactured by Taiwan Semiconductor. Putting tariffs on foreign semiconductor chips would push the US to manufacture locally. However, this could potentially lead to inflation in the short term, shortages, and retaliatory tariffs. The long-term effects are yet to be seen. Number 3, tariffs may be beneficial when they're only used for negotiation but not necessarily implemented.
Siguiendo con este tema, Presidenta, ¿cómo impactará esta potencial guerra arancelaria la revisión del tema?
No va a haber potencial guerra arancelaria.
¿No?
Él plantea justamente que el tema de la migración en la frontera sur de ellos, norte nuestra, y el tema del fentanilo, pues son dos temas que le preocupan y ese era el argumento, digamos, para poner los aranceles. Todo esto se lo planteé al presidente Trump y le dije, la caravana que puso en su publicación, pues esa caravana en realidad no va a llegar a la frontera norte porque tenemos una estrategia en donde se está atendiendo en nuestro país.
In my opinion, tariffs are probably okay when targeted towards certain industries that suffer from unethical competition or unfair trade practices. However, I do not think that a blanket tariff on all goods is a good idea. In the short term, tariffs can be highly inflationary, cause retaliation, and create economic inefficiency. Further, industries shielded from global competition may not innovate as quickly. In the long run, though, there are probably consequences for having near 100% manufacturing dependency on foreign countries. Complete dependency on foreign manufacturing in the future could lead to a power imbalance down the line where the foreign country could have much greater negotiating power. Also, there might be negative consequences in the long term for having a chronically large trade deficit. The long-term effects of tariffs remain to be seen. Let me know your opinion on tariffs down below, or if you agree or disagree with Trump's tariffs or the fact that the US is moving towards a more protectionist ideology. I'll see you guys in the next video.